All right, welcome back to another one of these response videos. This time I wanted to look at the inconvenient truth about the Democratic Party because, um, based on the like, dislike, and also the fact that the comments are saying things like Martin Luther King Jr., who was a socialist, was a Republican, I kind of felt like this one might be very relevant and interesting, and apparently it's very important to discuss. So let's see what this video is about.
When you think about racial equality and civil rights, which political party comes to mind? The Republicans or the Democrats?
Obviously, the
Most
Democrats.
people would probably say the Democrats, but this answer is incorrect.
What?
Since its
No
founding in
way.
1829, the Democratic Party has fought against every major civil rights initiative and has a long.
So, the president, when the Civil Rights Act was passed in the 1960s, was a Democrat. So, that's not true. But, anyways,
Long history of discrimination. The Democratic Party defended slavery, started the Civil War, opposed Reconstruction, founded the Ku Klux Klan, imposed segregation, perpetrated lynchings, and fought against the Civil Rights Acts of the 1950s and 1960s.
so I'm gonna probably end up elaborating on this more as the video goes along. But this isn't a party thing, this is a regional location thing. The South was in favor of slavery and the Civil War and against Reconstruction and wanted segregation and did not want the Civil Rights Act. And it didn't really matter what party you were in typically, but the South was where the people who supported that came from, and the North was overwhelmingly where the people who opposed slavery and all that stuff and supported Reconstruction and stuff, that's where those people came from. And it's not really necessarily a party thing as much as a location issue.
In contrast, the Republican Party was founded in 1854 as an anti slavery party. Its mission was to stop the spread of slavery into the new Western territories.
And it's true that at the time they were founded based on that. But if you're thinking about the fact that civil rights leaders who lived until today, like, Elijah Cummings and John Lewis? That's his name, right? John Lewis? I'm remembering his name, right? We're going to check. Yes, John Lewis. Excellent. People like that were in the Democratic Party, and when they pushed for more civil rights things, like a new civil rights bill and better voting rights for African Americans and things like that, it's really interesting that when those things come up in Congress today, Democrats are the ones who vote in favor of a new civil rights bill, and the Republicans don't. I'm sure that's definitely not relevant to this conversation, though.
With the aim of abolishing it entirely. This effort, however, was dealt a major blow by the Supreme Court in the 1857 case Dred Scott versus Sandford. The court ruled that slaves aren't citizens, they're property. The seven justices who voted in favor of slavery, all Democrats, the two justices who dissented, both Republicans. The slavery question was, of course, ultimately resolved by a bloody civil war. The commander in chief during that war was the first Republican president.
Yeah, so again, you're thinking about like where did Abraham Lincoln come from? Well, he represented the state of Illinois. Okay. Illinois is what now? A democratic state. You think about who left in favor of slavery. Uh, in the Civil War. What states left? It's all the South, all Republican states. You think about what states stayed in the Union, it's all the North, all Democratic states. The reasoning for this is pretty straightforward. It's that the North typically tends to be more liberal and the South tends to be more conservative, and conservatives were in favor of slavery and segregation and things like that.
Abraham Lincoln, the man who freed the slaves. 6 days after they
The man who might have been a friend with Karl Marx.
Confederate Army surrendered, John Wilkes Booth, a Democrat, assassinated President Lincoln. Lincoln's vice president, a Democrat named Andrew Johnson, assumed the presidency. But Johnson adamantly opposed Lincoln's plan to integrate the newly freed slaves into the South's economic and social order. Johnson and the Democratic Party were unified.
Let's see where Andrew Johnson is from. Oh, not Andrew Young. Let's see where he's from. I'm curious. Look at that. He's from North Carolina, a state that left the Union. Let's see about John Wilkes Booth. He's from Maryland. Okay, so that's one of the mixed states. So, guy can swing either way. But unsurprisingly, Andrew Johnson, who was in favor of not doing strict Reconstruction measures on the South, was from a southern state, a conservative state that left the Union.
Opposition to the 13th Amendment, which abolished slavery, the 14th Amendment, which gave blacks citizenship, and the 15th Amendment, which gave blacks the vote. All three passed only because of universal Republican support. During the era of Reconstruction, federal troops stationed in the South helped secure rights for the newly freed slaves. Hundreds of black men were elected to Southern state legislatures as Republicans, and 22 black Republicans.
And you know what? Who is it that has almost all of the black representation in the Senate and in the House of Representatives today? It's the Democrats, and black people vote overwhelmingly for the Democrats today. So this isn't some kind of like wait, what would be your reasoning? Like this isn't like a trick. Like they're not all tricked or something ridiculous. Like there's a shift in the party dynamic here and in the locations that they cater to for their bases.
Served in the U.S. Congress by 1900. The Democrats did not elect a black man to Congress until 1935. But after Reconstruction ended, when the federal troops went home, Democrats roared back into power in the South. They quickly reestablished white supremacy across the region with measures like black codes, laws that restricted the ability of blacks to own property and run businesses, and they imposed poll taxes and literacy tests.
Yeah, but again, these are things that are typically more regional than party based because the reason that an argument like this from Prager U works so well today is that politics today, because of our internet and just general reach, is not nearly as regional as it used to be. Politics are a very national topic now. Parties have national appeal. At the time, if you were running as a Republican or a Democrat in like Louisiana, you probably weren't you probably weren't tied to the to candidates in other areas the way that people are now. Like there was no national cohesion like that. People were very regionally focused on what they wanted. So when the South was in favor of white supremacy and being conservative and all that stuff, people who ran in the South people who ran and were elected in the South typically tended to reflect those values. But when you consider that today politics are very national and you say things like Democrats liked this, by taking that national approach to things and like applying it backwards in time, it doesn't really work. Regionally, Democrats in the North supported very different things from Democrats in the South.
Used to subvert black citizens' right to vote. And how was all of this enforced? By terror, much of it instigated by the Ku Klux Klan, founded by a Democrat, Nathan Bedford Forrest. As historian Eric Foner, himself a Democrat, notes, in effect, the Klan was a military force serving the interests of the Democratic Party.
Yes, a very different Democratic Party.
President Woodrow Wilson, a Democrat, shared many views with the Klan. He resegregated many federal agencies and even screened the first movie ever played at the White House, the racist film The Birth of a Nation.
Let's see where Woodrow Wilson was from. I actually don't know. I'm kind of curious. Virginia. It's a state that just very, very recently went Democratic because of its cities and suburbs. But back then, in the 1850s, Woodrow Wilson grew up as a kid in the Confederacy. Weird.
Originally entitled The Klansman. A few decades later, the only serious congressional opposition to the landmark Civil Rights Act of 1964 came from Democrats. 80% of Republicans in Congress supported the bill, less than 70% of Democrats did. Democratic senators filibustered the bill for 75 days until Republicans mustered the few extra votes
And I
needed to pass.
guarantee you, if we look it up, all the Democratic senators who filibustered were from the South. I'm almost certain of it. And I bet if we looked it up, Democrats who were ready to vote for it pretty quickly were from the North. The connection between these things is not necessarily very complicated.
To break the logjam. And when all of their efforts to enslave blacks, keep them enslaved, and then keep them from voting had failed, the Democrats came up with a new strategy. If black people are going to vote, they might as well vote for Democrats. As President Lyndon Johnson was purported to have said about the Civil Rights Act, I'll have them voting Democrat for 200 years. So now, the Democratic.
Of course, there is some level of how do I say it? Political calculations involved with anything like this, right? I mean, that makes sense. Of course, he was thinking, man, if we really get ahead of it, I'm sure we can make a big difference. But, I mean, he did pass the bill. It's not like the Republican candidate in 1968, Barry Goldwater, who was running in favor of segregation. Was it 1968? Here, we can check. We can look it up right now. 1964, Barry Goldwater ran in 1964 against Lyndon Johnson. Barry Goldwater, the Republican from Arizona, who, let's see, in the general election, where does it say Johnson campaigned on continuation of funding social programs? Goldwater advocated, war, but we're looking for. Yeah, it was an up, whatever thing. He was an influential member of the party's conservative wing. See? Conservative wing. And he supported segregation. I'm looking, it's probably I probably scrolled over it and I'm just not seeing it. But I remember him being in favor of the states' rights segregation argument and stuff like that. So, but I don't, I'm feared that race would become a major issue. Extremists from the right, from the party. Look at that. Before we go back to the video, Michigan Governor George Romney mustered a veiled attack on Goldwater, proposing to add an amendment to the Republican platform excluding extremists from the right from the party. He was endorsed by Ayn Rand and Ronald Reagan and Richard Nixon, and he supported segregation. Anyways, I'm sure it's just a coincidence that, the guy who ran against Johnson was a Republican supporting segregation, and definitely not a sign of some kind of party flip and regional shift in interests and supporting values.
Democratic Party prospers on the votes of the very people it has spent much of its history oppressing.
And another thing now is you say much of its history, but we're looking at the modern day now, right? And it's Republican states that always make it more difficult for people to vote. Like you look at the largest minority segment of Texas. Was it? It's called Harris County, I think. It has like Austin or Houston or one of those cities that I'm blanking on which one. And they had one ballot box for the whole county of millions of people. And it's so weird, right? That it's always minorities in Republican places that have difficulty voting. It's almost like the interests of the parties are different.
Democrats falsely claim that the Republican Party is the villain when in reality it's the failed policies of the Democratic Party that have kept blacks down. Massive government welfare has decimated the black family. Opposition to school
Has that decimated the black family, or maybe Ronald Reagan's war on drugs, perhaps that just that specifically and um what's the other word that specifically and I don't know, it's like laser focused targeting almost on the drugs used primarily by black people. I'm sure that's just, I'm sure that's not the reason and not the welfare.
choice has kept them trapped in failed.
School choice and private schools aren't the solution as much as providing better funding for schools um, with lower levels of income. Like school districts shouldn't rely on their area's income to try and run as public schools, because obviously that makes it more difficult for poor places to get better schooling. So school support should be maybe spread around throughout the state more effectively and more efficiently. If each state is going to have some control like that, they should probably do better at balancing.
Failing schools, politically correct policing has left black neighborhoods defenseless against violent crime.
I've never heard of politically correct policing before, but I'm gonna say that it's probably not that, because police tend to be pretty focused on African American communities. They tend to stop black people more and like pull over black people more and stuff like that. Black people tend to have a rougher go of things. I don't think that's what's keeping violent. That's not like the police are pretty focused in there. The reason that there's violent crime is because no one's like doing things to alleviate poverty, and not because there's apparently not enough police, seems to be the implication here.
So, when you think about racial equality and civil rights, which political party should come to mind? I'm Carol
I think we answered that question throughout this video. I hope we did.
Swain, professor of political science and law at Vanderbilt University for Prager University.
Yeah, so that's an interesting one, and a longer one definitely, but um, I think worthwhile because it's apparently very relevant. I mean, slap in the face of truth. Um, that's a mood. This film needs about 330 million views. Yeah, no, it doesn't. YouTube needs to quit hiding videos like this. Like, Republicans have their interests at heart, apparently. I was called racist for being a Republican yesterday. I mean, you probably support a president who instituted a Muslim ban and things like that. So yeah. Um, wait, you mean the Ronald Reagan who said that diplomats from Africa were monkeys who walked around with shoes on their hands, and he called them the N-word? That Ronald Reagan? Anyways, anyways, thank y'all for checking out this one. I think that this one's maybe one of the most influential videos I guess I've tackled so far. So hopefully it makes a difference, and have a nice day.